Hi, welcome to this session today. The name of the session is Cloud Readiness for Government Institutions, educational, nonprofit, basically any public sector institution. And we're going to have a 45-minute conversation here with a group of excellent panelists. But what we really want to make sure that we do is that we answer the questions that are on your minds as you're on this journey to cloud. And we have some ideas because of the work that this panel has done. But again, I really encourage you to open up and ask your questions and make sure that we're on target. We are going to try to use 3 basic unifying themes. I guess that's the next slide. So before I move to the unifying themes, let me go ahead and talk just a little bit about my background, and then I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves. My name is Max Peterson. I run the worldwide public sector partner capture and contracts business for Amazon Web Services. And I have been in the government space for 28 years, or I should say public sector space. So there's a good amount of background and experience I've got, and I'd love to share with you all. And now let me turn it over to our panelists for a quick introduction and maybe one quick learning that you've got that you'll share.
All right. I'm Mike Cardwell. I'm the CIO for the Department of State Health Services in Texas. We're your public health agency as well as mental health and some regulatory services, public lab, things like Ebola. We're about 12,000 employees, $3 billion a year, and about 300 IT staff. And my tagline for cloud is, don't do it unless you're ready to change some processes and some of your chargeback mechanisms and some of the ways you report on the efficacy of IT.
So good afternoon. My name is Nikki Williams. I'm a business development manager with Lockheed Martin Energy Solutions. So clearly I'm not here to talk about airplanes, if anybody thinks that we're here to say airplanes today, but our Energy Solutions group is focused on providing sustainability solutions to both federal, commercial, as well as utility companies. And basically we offer world-class comprehensive solutions in energy efficiency and business and security services, as well as green IT. And that time back into cloud and what we do here, or what we're here to discuss today, the direct correlation between infrastructure footprint, IT workloads, and energy expenditures, and how we're able to utilize cloud to bring some of those savings to our customer.
Thanks, Nikki.
My name is MJ DiBerdino. I'm the CTO at Cloudnexa. We work with all types of public sector, from federal to SLED. One of the main lessons learned I can say that I've shared with any client from federal to state and local is to try to get away from firm fixed price model. You know, we're going to Amazon, we're going to scalable cloud solution, commodity priced, have a contract that allows for this type of pricing.
Thanks, MJ. And so here's our thoughts on themes for today. But again, I want to emphasize we're really interested in hearing from you and what your questions and challenges are as you proceed on this journey to cloud. The first one that we're going to talk about is strategies for transformation. And I think we have all learned that this is not about just IT. And in fact, in many organizations, this is about what are we doing with our people and our human resources to get them on the journey to cloud and to get them skilled up to be able to make that journey. So a lot of focus on strategies and transformation is what I've heard from this group. The second one, in their experience, has been getting your arms around compliance and standards and policy, which is kind of all the enabling things that you need to be able to agree upon a cloud strategy and then embark upon it and implement it. And then the third thing that this panel has talked a lot about in their experience is making sure that you've got a solid operational model and making sure that you understand how you're accounting for costs, but perhaps more importantly, how you're accounting for those savings as you stop doing things that you used to do when you move to your cloud model. And so those are some of the themes that we've got for the panel today. And I thought I would tee it up by asking a kind of a straightforward question, which is, in your journey to the cloud, what did you do to actually start that journey of transformation? Mike, why don't we go with you?
Well, one of the first things we did was we were looking at costs. We're not a chargeback shop, but we're primarily a showback shop. And there was a statewide data center implementation, and we were looking at the costs associated with infrastructure, and it was steadily increasing. Ironically, the number one cost for those data center was the storage and backups, and ironically, the market was actually decreasing drastically. And so we started to look at that. And so what we did is we stood on the sidelines for our first implementation and actually let one of our boxed-up products flip from a maintenance and support agreement to a SaaS. And so we shaped it in a way that we wanted to go to AWS. We were already leaning towards that for some infrastructure. And so we worked with, in this case, the vendor on that product to move that to a SaaS. And we just stood back from the sidelines and watched how they implemented the learning curve they had. And at the end of the day, we were focused on uptime availability of the app and weren't so focused on how you implement within AWS as much as the infrastructure. And it was a learning curve, kind of a little toe in the water, if you would, of see how this thing works. And then, of course, some of the learning curve after that was, oh, wow, if we're going to do this, then we got to change that. And so that kind of started some dominoes moving. So.
Yeah. So that's, you have to start somewhere, and that was an approach to starting with a fairly defined project and then learning. Yep. Nikki, how about you?
I think that I'll take it from a different slant, so from an organizational perspective, and basically being ready for the paradigm shift with your people. When you're talking about going to the cloud, a lot of this is not so much focused around the technology, but actually getting ready to make the cultural shifts that are necessary. This perceived loss of control. You know, I'm giving up my stuff and my control and handing it over to an OCIO shop or some central shop. So I think a lot of what we talk to our customers about is making sure that you've had the conversations, the big tent conversations with all the stakeholders in the room, and discussed exactly how that's going to take place to get them very comfortable and ready to adopt and go to this new model. Particularly as you move up the stack and you're talking about going from not even just infrastructure, but platform and solution as a service type implementations where you're talking about doing application rationalization and programs of record and some of the pains, you know, that come through that. We've done it at Lockheed Martin internally with our EBS group, so I've seen it, you know, from an internal corporate perspective. We've seen these struggles happen with our DoD customers, and certainly we're watching and trying to help some of our customers that are going through this on the federal side. So that's one consideration. I think also with respect to your budgeting and planning process, a lot of times it's important that you do that work up front because you're shifting that model as well, right? So you may be dealing in a current situation where your budgeting is very CapEx intensive, and right now you're shifting from something that's basically a lease versus buy model. So as opposed to capital expenditures, you're going to see a lot of charges now shifting to operational expenditures. And whether or not your finance organization, your budgeting and planning organization is able to handle that. So those are a lot of the things that we talk to our customers about in terms of readiness from an organizational perspective. We find that to be some of the largest challenges.
And I've heard from customers, right, that budgeting and planning and figuring out how much the solution is going to cost is one of those things. And I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that. But before I get there, MJ, who is with with Cloudnexa, who is an Amazon Premier Partner and who has seen a lot of customer implementations, maybe if you could just give us maybe two examples. What's one thing that somebody did right that you've seen that you'd emphasize to the audience is a good approach? And maybe what's one thing that maybe you'd recommend they steer away from in this startup and get started and transformation sort of area?
Well, as Nikki and Mike were saying, I mean, one of the biggest things that a customer can do right is really staying open to what the Amazon platform has to offer and being able to shift that application mindset of development and deployment and getting away from just a lift and drop model and really utilizing the services beyond just, you know, what you would do in your colo or just on a server basis and being able to extend beyond that. I mean, in terms of, you know, what a customer would do wrong, well, that's a tough one, right? Because you never want to throw someone under the bus, but
Do you all want to know what things to steer away from? Any practical experience? They're not going to let you off the hook, MJ. You're going to have to answer that one.
Being prepared for accepting your application to run in Amazon. If you've made an award and you want to move into Amazon, accept that, understand what it means, understand the compliance that Amazon has to offer, and that it will be secure and meet your expectations, and really try to adopt and accept the deployment.
I think we've all learned different things from the School of Hard Knocks as we have gone about the cloud transformation and deployment piece. I'll share one thing that I've seen from customers, and that's that they approach cloud projects sometimes in the same way that they've approached enterprise data center projects for years and years and years. And it's a big, long project that they follow through a serial step of waterfalls. From a what not to do perspective, the successful projects that I've been involved on with customers are ones where they have kind of broken that apart, and they've realized that to actually get the speed and agility that they're wanting, they have to rethink how they form up their project team. And so from the start, they form up a project team that includes the IT stakeholders, the business stakeholders, probably the acquisition or procurement stakeholders, and don't forget about security. Because while there, as you heard in the keynotes, there's a great body of information and tools and compliance to help you meet security inside your organization. If you don't tee that up at the right time with your CISO, you run the very real risk of kind of maybe making some choices that make them uncomfortable versus making other choices that they could have been comfortable with. And so I said that somebody brought up budgeting and how do I plan for it and what impact does that have. And I know, folks, that seems to be something that everybody struggles with. Is there anybody here who's looking at how do you plan for cloud? Is that something you care about? Yes, okay, here we go. So, Mike, I'll break the monotony, but since you're right here, can you describe some things in the state of Texas that you may have done?
So I know nothing about the federal cycles, but Nikki hit on it. And and when you start talking about CapEx versus OpEx, and particularly at our state level, we're locked into a 2-year cycle on CapEx dollars. And I get a little more flexibility at op, but if I can burn down an infrastructure project that's CapEx, I got to now figure out how to convert that to OpEx dollars. And so, like I was talking about earlier, some cost avoidance we were doing was on our statewide data center, which is locked up in CapEx dollars, and we're trying to figure out, okay, now I'm sitting in the black, how do I divert that to additional Amazon services? So I don't think we're really got the CFO fully on board of the cycle of it, and mainly because it's Ray would probably tell you, it's that state cycle of the legislative appropriation request, and you're planning. We were planning 2 months ago for something we're going to be done 3 years from then. The crystal ball is not that clear, and so a lot of it, though, what really worked out well is when we ended up in the black on the data center, and the customer realizes they weren't being charged for what we were saving, and that the consumption that was going into our AWS and our managed service partner, it was not showing back up in their departments. That's when they started to get interested and like, wait, there's savings here, and we're reinvesting the savings back into the program. So I think it's two sides. One is, I was a junior accounting major. I thought I was going to get out of accounting, but it follows you. And so if you can be an accountant and help the CFO, but don't forget your service delivery side and show them that, hey, we can work past some of these areas around how to make this a savings and reinvest it back in the program. So just the same way you would at home, if your cable bill goes down, which it doesn't, you wouldn't just take those dollars and give it back to Direct or UVerse or whoever it is. You would find something new to different with those dollars. And so make sure you're doing a net add or a net new service.
And Mike also mentioned a person I left out of the stakeholder discussion up front. You should get your CFO, your controller, yes, or whoever holds those purse strings and ultimately does the financial accounting involved as part of that upfront project team.
And on that, I would even get down to you need the PMs that are working with the individual budget manager for individual projects. Because we can do some things now within our projects to say, look, we budgeted that at CapEx dollars and infrastructure. And oh, by the way, we're not going to stand up physical infrastructure. Please leave that within the project budget, but we're going to now just change the color of money, move it over here, if they're flexible to that. But start getting down, don't forget just the CFO and the budget and the accounting director, but really those PMs or the budget people that are working with your individual project managers, because that was where a lot of the rubber met the road, and people were like, oh, I can change this. I've got we call it capital authority. They can free up that capital authority to do other investments. So.
Yeah, that's excellent. Nikki, maybe you can comment on the federal side for folks who are...
Well, on the federal side, with respect to some programs that are out there that are a little bit more innovative. So, one of the things we talked about was energy saving performance contracts, or ESPCs, and how that can be leveraged by some of our federal customers. So, Lockheed Martin actually is the only designated energy services company that has extensive IT experience. So we're taking that and working really closely with our Department of Energy customer to help them with their data center consolidation initiatives. And so I know that in certain segments, ESPCs are kind of thrown around as a buzz, and we're trying to see how it gains traction moving forward. But it really helps to, I think, address two major issues that are on folks' mind, both the CIO and the CFO shop, when you talk about these data center consolidation mandates that are coming from the government. One, who's going to cover this upfront cost, this perceived sunk cost of going through and actually doing the restructuring and the consolidation? And two, how can I prove how much money it's going to save me? What's my ROI? How do I do that? So one of the things that we're doing through ESPCs with our customers is we're really charged with looking at innovative ways to bring in third-party financing to help cover some of that upfront investment. And through the way the contract is structured, you're guaranteed savings based upon performance, which are then reinvested and actually go to help pay for that upfront investment that was made by the third-party financer. And of course, once all of the savings are realized, whatever's left is the future savings are passed on to the government. They continue to make that. So we've been really successful in one deployment recently with Department of State, working with one of their embassies in Nicaragua, putting forward an energy savings performance contract model. And through that, I believe we were saving them about $36 million over the course of the 25-year contract that they were able to gain through using third-party financing to cover that upfront cost.
Quick question for the audience. How many folks here are with the federal government agency or a partner supporting federal government customers? Okay, so a pretty good number. So are you, can folks use the ESPC process then to help fund their cloud transformation project?
Absolutely. So as I stated, one example would be what we've done with the Department of State. With their FEMP program. We're actually working with Department of Energy. I think if your agency is interested in taking advantage of ESPCs, that's something that you work directly through Department of Energy, and they show you exactly how to walk through the process and take advantage of that model. But that's certainly something that we're talking to with a lot of our customers that are looking to move forward to cloud is, hey, we can certainly move forward in a traditional acquisition model, but have you considered the fact that there is this program out here, and this may be a way for you to capitalize on that?
Yeah. I know most people are always very happy to get somebody else contributing to their project, so that sounds like a good way to do it. Before I move on down the line with some more questions, is there anybody in the audience here who would like to put a question to the panel? There's probably a T-shirt, right? Probably a Cloudnexa T-shirt in it for you.
Sure.
There we go. Yes, sir.
So I'm in the federal space, and I'm what's called product offering.
Would you mind standing up and speaking so that everybody can hear? I'll try to repeat the question if you haven't heard it.
I support a federal customer, and since I've been here, I've seen a lot of differences what the Fed offers versus the commercial cloud. Are you seeing federal customers use things like double encryption to get around some of the regulatory issues using the commercial cloud?
Good question. Essentially, the gentleman said that there's the Amazon commercial cloud services that exist in all of our regions, and then one special cloud called the US GovCloud region that has some additional capabilities oriented toward government customers. And the question was essentially, what are folks doing with encryption or other security to be able to handle their business in that GovCloud?
In the non-Gov cloud.
Oh, in the non-GovCloud, I'm sorry.
Cloud is a little bit more feature.
Yes. Okay, good question. So I got a little bit wrong. I recognize the GovCloud has all these extra things, but what are federal customers or other customers doing in the commercial cloud to make it acceptable to use? MJ, you want to try that one first?
Yeah, I mean, basically with our clients, the first thing we need to understand is what compliance do they fall under. With federal space, it's usually FedRAMP first. And since FedRAMP is covered in commercial cloud as well as GovCloud, then the next question comes, you know, if it's FIPS 140-2 or ITAR. And if it goes down that line, then we have to look at GovCloud. It's the only region that would cover those compliances. But otherwise, with FedRAMP and FISMA, covering FISMA moderate, that is available in commercial cloud as well.
So if I self-encrypt with FIPS 142, I can't use commercial cloud?
No, because the endpoints on the Amazon side, you'd have to go to GovCloud.
Well, actually, let me add to that just a little bit. If your agency that you're dealing with has a security officer, a CISO, that is deeply wedded to hardware encryption, FIPS 140-2 hardware encryption, then the GovCloud is the one region in AWS that has that specific hardware encryption. However, some CISOs are kind of forward thinking a little bit more about how to move to the cloud. And so some CISOs are now willing to accept 140-2 software encryption as an alternative. That's what we do. And then Mike's got some experience here, so let me...
So I'm not in the federal space. I don't have to deal with FISMA. I do have to deal with FIPS and some of the CDC guidelines. We intentionally did not choose GovCloud for that feature capability, and we didn't want to wait for that maturity roadmap. And it was an early fight early on, and our very first one had to do with how we're going to check the box FIPS, and what are we going to do? And so luckily the first one was actually SQL, and on SQL it's just a checkbox and we're done. And so that took care of it. But then we ran into the Oracle side, and we're like, oh goodness, what are we going to do with this? And the issue came down, which I think has since been resolved, somebody here from AWS said, that we were trying to run Oracle within RDS, and then within RDS there were some other things that really were more of a HIPAA issue. And so again, we just addressed it by using our own licenses, not running it through RDS. But again, we could choose software encryption and not be forced back to, a legacy or, on-prem type solution because we'd already kind of constrained ourselves to say, look, we're not going to choose GovCloud and we're not going to be doing on-prem.
Yeah, so I guess the message on that is, and I think MJ had talked about this earlier, is make sure you sit down and have that security conversation and you define, the as-is state. And then have the conversation about what opportunities are possible in the cloud that you're going to choose. And when you have that conversation, you may find that you can get the CISO to a place where Mike got his folks to, where they accepted software encryption as an acceptable alternative. But I would encourage everybody here to have that conversation up front. And again, this is where planning early as a kind of all of the stakeholders really can help you get over that hurdle instead of launching a project and then, hitting it as a roadblock on the last thing before trying to go live. That was a great question. Thank you very much. Anybody else who's got a question that they'd like to specifically put to the panel and hear some of their experience? Oh, sir?
Have you dealt with any accidental data spills in
The question was, does anybody here have experience with accidental data spills where something that was supposed to be private data was unintentionally lost, right?
classified, or data is really classified?
Oh.
Then the customer wants, usually you have to go through data spill procedures to recover.
Okay, I think the gentleman's actually asking a more specific question, which is specifically between a system that has classified data
Classified that gets reclassified as classified.
and unclassified.
And addressed.
Anybody on our panel have experience with that?
The closest thing we've had, theoretically, of course, was a data exposure, and it was human error, but it was in the cloud, so the question came up, and it was HIV patient data, and so it came up, but again, it was really a human error back to the way they were leveraging the system, and so it was, there was a data entry operator and basically keyed it in wrong, but we haven't had anything, and I've got a lot of HIPAA compliance concerns, but so I don't think I can address specifically the classified versus unclassified.
Any other panels have some experience with that? Well, so I'll add one other thing for you. Here again, the transformative part of moving from traditional on-prem computing to cloud computing introduces a dialogue. And we have experience with some agencies where they have adopted essentially a digital data shred policy, which says if I've appropriately encrypted information and I control the keys, and that information becomes, gets out of whatever I'm trying to, whatever classified system, then I can digitally destroy it. But ultimately, if you're working in that intelligence community space, there are specific directions on how you can treat that data. It's part of, I believe it's part of ICD 503, and it used to be covered under the NISPOM. But all of that is really kind of in a state of flux. And if you're from that community and you want more information, we actually have a group that supports the IC, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with that team afterward, and they can kind of probably give you a better answer than we can up here on the panel for that question, sir. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, we got one over here. Yes. Oh. Was it an answer? Somebody from the audience? Oh, right here, sir.
I have a question for you in reference to compliance with TIC mandates. How are people dealing with that as far as when they move their infrastructure to the cloud? What is that driving factor, and how are we moving forward to remediate that?
And so the gentleman asks, how are agencies dealing with the TIC mandate? And I think by TIC you mean Trusted Internet Connection?
That is correct, DHS.
Yes, with DHS.
Okay. And I know we deal with that on Department of Interior.
Anybody here on the panel?
Well, we've been in design with a client with this mandate, and we've been looking at leveraging Direct Connect and the partner Equinix to bring their private lines over their secure internet connection into a private cage within Equinix, and then go over a private cross connect back into the Amazon region.
And that's to follow on that. Here, I am in the process of moving my infrastructure up to the AWS cloud, and we tackle that. And you're right, out at Equinix in Ashburn, Virginia, we actually got our TIC provider, which is essentially to hook up with Equinox. And we have actually got that connection. We're still testing that. So this is for everyone here, a lesson learned for us. If we start going this endeavor, we're looking at bringing all our traffic back to our data center to put it out to the internet. So we got with the TIC, we got with the AWS, and we worked out this solution. I think we're the first ones to do this, if I'm not mistaken, or pretty close to it on the leading edge on that. But the real question is as we move forward with this, is AWS going to embrace some of the other carriers, Verizon, AT&T, to provide that link out to the internet for us?
So under the Direct Connect program, AWS does have a number of different providers that can provide Direct Connect. We have a number of different providers in that Direct Connect space that could offer probably a similar colo type of arrangement to what you just described. And we do have partners that, while it may not be specific for TIC reasons, we do have partners that have done things that they variously called intelligent cloud hubs, where the concept is very much like what you just said, and what MJ just said. You locate right there at the colo, which is then basically directly connected to the AWS infrastructure. And so I think that approach that you just described is one that makes sense. And you do it in combination, I'm assuming, with virtual private cloud. Yeah. And so that's what we're seeing. And so the approach that you took is something that I would say that's pretty much what we've seen from others.
And if you could get some maturity on that, it'd be good, because we're still in the Direct Connect, bringing it all back, so.
Yeah, well, that, and we did, we looked at some of the latency that was involved in that, to type it out, bring it back. I support 142 overseas sites, about 50 domestic sites, and for us to try to manage all that traffic at a data center.
Yep.
It's just unmanageable, piping all that traffic. We have double traffic, double data, double bandwidth, double latency, and that was the solution. That was, nobody had ever heard of it. We were just kind of feeling our way through. So that's good information for everybody.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for sharing. Anybody else with the question? Yes, ma'am. Great question. Great question. The question was, we talked about people as part of the transformation. From a practical perspective, what kind of strategies did you use to get people in the organization aligned and on board with the cloud project? What challenges do you have in doing that? Is that about right? I'm going to mix it up and start down with MJ this time, and we'll come.
Well, as a service provider, we actually challenge our clients back, and we challenge them to take a different approach to how to structure a contract with their service provider in terms of cost. Rather than charging them large assessment fees up front to get them comfortable with the process, have the provider really bear a lot of risk with them through the design, through the cultural change, get them comfortable with you as a provider as well. And we do that purely on a commodity pricing structure as well. So our managed services is actually based on Amazon's usage, where we don't charge large upfront expenditures just to get started. And that really helps make our clients feel comfortable just starting with the process, getting into a POC phase, and becoming more comfortable with the cloud.
Nikki, how about you?
I think from our perspective, and we work very closely with MJ and the folks at Cloudnexa, a lot of our approach, really, especially taking a systems integration point of view, is being able to sit down and actually help facilitate some of the conversations that need to happen amongst the major stakeholders. A lot of times, one thing that we try to drive home to our customers is you need to meet with us early and often. There's so many things as customers begin to make this shift that they may not even realize that they don't know yet. And we've seen it play out in not so great a way sometimes in certain programs where it was 30 days in and you're realizing there's certain things with respect to security that have not been fully talked through with all the stakeholders, with respect to even things like slight architectural shifts if you're trying to do a one-for-one move from physical infrastructure to the cloud. So a lot of what we do is sitting around the table and really trying to help facilitate that dialogue between all of the major stakeholders. I think one thing also that MJ mentioned that's important here is really translating that value. I mean, you're always going to have certain people that are going to be resistant, and I think Mike, he touched on it earlier when we were talking, because there's this perception of, so if we go to cloud, does my job go away? What is happening? What is this going to do to staffing? And there are many of our customers that we talk to where that's somewhat of an issue, but then you realize that this whole group of engineers and scientists that's their day job, and then they're part-time IT people. And so a lot of what we do is going in and helping them realize the value of the managed services that Cloudnexa brings, in addition with Lockheed Martin, and how that frees your scientists and your engineers up to do the science and the engineering, and being able to repurpose and reallocate resources such that it's more effective to the mission. So it really is, helping people to understand, we're Lockheed, we're Cloudnexa, we're here to help. We're not here to break the system. So, a lot of it with us is just really facilitating communication.
Well, Mike, you're pretty
and
far.
fostering transparency.
Pardon.
Sorry.
Mike, you're pretty far down the path on a number of these. You've got to have some more stories.
There was weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, I would say start in IT first, believe it or not. Don't start with your customer, because our biggest challenge is most of the design was going on, the solutioning, if you will, was going on within our app dev areas, which are overly influenced by program decisions. And I want that on the business requirements, and I want them the business knowledge, but I want the program out of IT decisions, clearly. And so there was a lot of work on, bringing on a CTO, bringing on architects under them, having really frank conversations with people going, you code, he designs, he implements, don't cross the streams. And so that really was the first thing. I mean, our ISO was on board, but some of his people weren't. Even like things I didn't see coming, like my T's and C's guy was all hung up on whether our data was out of state. And I'm just like, you're the T's and C's guys, let's get this contract inked, and then we'll, the security guy will worry about his job. And so you did have to have frank conversations, because people come to you with opinions, and especially from the program side. I just didn't expect it as much on my IT side. So we spent a lot of time there. And then we really cherry picked, and we said, look, this customer, they work with a lot of data. Oh, by the way, all their data is denormalized. It's de-identified. So, let's go choose them. And so, like some of our early on things, while they weren't Amazon, we did some Salesforce things and some other things that were like, embrace the cloud. Use some of our SharePoint stuff that we already had up in the cloud. And then we started doing our gateway. We actually had a partner with that. And we made sure that okay, it's also words. So when you're sitting down with a program area, you don't need to walk around in cloud, Amazon, because it just creates more anxiety. It's about your business requirements, the state requirements, the security requirements. And even we had a legislature inquiry the other day, and I said, well, all the state requirements, all of our agency requirements, all of our enterprise requirements are still met in these solutions, and whether it's my on-prem, my state data center, or my cloud, and then we can talk about how we implement that. But you do really need to go cherry pick on the customer side, because there's some people out there that they're more concerned about with either the cost or the time to delivery. That's what we started with. It was about time to delivery. There was some cycles there right when I came on. They were ending the fiscal year, and money's going to expire and grants are going to dry up. And I'm sure y'all have never heard that. And so we could leverage some of that stuff through services where we couldn't on building out infrastructure. And so we kind of picked them and chose them wisely, and then they look back at it, and then they could start doing some of their grassroots with their peers, and and even then having frank conversations with our leadership of like our public health gateway. I mean, the data doesn't live there. It comes in, it comes out, it goes where it's supposed to go. So security's still met at the application level, but yet we're doing everything that looks transitory, which is similar. I think the question you're asking here is you also have to change how you do some of your data warehousing to where it's more of a logical data warehouse instead of a legacy data warehouse. And so you want to think about how you're mapping things out, but I would definitely cherry pick the customers and make sure you got your IT house in order first. So.
Yeah, those are some good ones. The other one I heard, I think, in a couple of themes here was project and role clarity. And so having clarity around the project, what it is and what it isn't, whether it's a start simple approach or whether it's a more complex approach, is one way that you're able to help people kind of all focus on what it is, as opposed to the worries that you might have on an unspecified, just kind of a general level. And then the other one I thought was a good call out was this is changing how some of the traditional roles that people might play. So it's interesting on the terms and conditions piece again. So delivering some role clarity, and then I also heard again the consensus and early cross-stakeholder involvement. You have to work out those issues. You have to get them out on the table, because if they just stay internalized, that's probably where you meet that resistance and you're not able to break through. These are great questions. Yes, sir. The question, this probably affects everybody, but specifically the conversation was, how do you protect yourself against the Anti-Deficiency Act, which essentially in federal contracting says, hey, you're not allowed to spend money that you're not properly obligated to spend and approved. Yep. But that same budgeting problem happens at a state level, and so maybe I'll let Mike take a crack at that.
I don't have a good answer. It was just a wag. We literally said this is our first year. I think I threw $100,500 at it for consumption before we even got into the managed services, and we said, well, watch the burn down. The irony was we begged the vendor to send us some stuff monthly so we could do it. He went over budget, and we said, sorry, good luck invoicing us. That's why we set the process up, and so we don't have a relationship with that vendor anymore. But we did prepay it as a credit because we wanted to see it as a burn down. We didn't want to be cutting invoices every month and reconciling all this stuff. And we knew that within our current AP processes that we would always be 3 months behind. And so when they sent me some stuff in October, says I went 24 grand over. Well, he had to eat it, and it was ugly. But at the same time, we tried to set up some processes where we could see that burn down. Now, obviously this year it's a little more. We've got a little flexibility in the contractor, but I don't have this federal requirement at the same time. But the trick is again, we just did a wag and said, look, we think it's going to be this, and then watch the burn down chart.
And so I do have some more experience on the federal side, and I'll go ahead and contribute that to you. There's actually a good resource, the Cloud Computing Caucus Advisory Group, and I apologize, I don't know the website right off the top, but Cloud Computing Caucus Advisory Group. It's an industry group that's working with Congress and agencies at a federal level to help them understand how they can move to cloud. That same question came up in a recent open public discussion, and there's some resources that are posted, but essentially it boiled down to the following. there are tools that customers or that your partners can implement for cost monitoring. So inside of Amazon, there's tools where you could get a daily readout on spend or monthly or whatever you or your contractor decides is appropriate, so you can measure and monitor it. The second thing is, in a lot of cases, the cloud projects that customers have undertaken has been on a not to exceed sort of a basis. And so they do pretty much what Mike said. They make an estimate of what they think their usage is going to be. They maybe add a little bit more contingency to it to arrive at a level they're going to budget at, and then they'll issue a purchase order on a not to exceed basis, and then they or the contractor will monitor it. And then, like other contracts, maybe in a time and materials professional services contract, if your best estimate and your not to exceed funding looks like it's going to be insufficient to accomplish whatever job you're trying to get done, then you have to either throttle back on the rate that you're spending, or you need to go and before funding runs out, get that modded to add additional funding. And so it's a practical matter. That's how we're seeing people do it. There's some other information that's available on the Cloud Computing Caucus Advisory Group, but in summary, there's enough guidance on how you can accomplish cloud computing and not fall into an Anti-Deficiency Act sort of a scenario, that's how agencies and customers that I'm familiar with are proceeding. Yes, sir, over here. I'm sorry, I think I saw you first.
So we have several contracts with state government agencies, and they are now adopting the FDIC security policy. You're familiar with that? I don't know if you want to deal with that. But one of the issues we run into is the fact that that policy states that contractors who have physical access to the servers must have fingerprint cards and background check on file with the FBI. And I'm wondering if you want to run into that as well, because Amazon obviously is not necessarily going to do that for everybody built in the cloud.
Nikki or MJ or Mike?
So I'm sorry, I didn't hear the
Oh, I'm sorry, let me
specific
repeat
mandate that
it. Let me repeat it. The question essentially was, this gentleman's working with applications in the law enforcement arena. As a result, CJIS, which is I think Criminal Justice Information Security regimes apply. And so how do people deal with CJIS security requirements on the AWS cloud?
Okay. I think from our perspective, dealing with our federal customers, of course, being Lockheed Martin and the federal background security checks that a lot of our workforce already has, that tends to not be as much of an issue. I do know that, like for instance, a client that we recently started working with, there's no way to get around it. Even with a lot of the clearances that our personnel currently hold, you still have to go through the individual checks of the agencies. Unfortunately, our clearances do not carry over as seamlessly as you would like. But unfortunately, that's not a solution or a very good answer to your question. But I mean, basically, we work within the system. We haven't found ways around that. We still have. What we have found, though, in a lot of instances, is that once you go through the pain, it certainly helps when you're putting together your day one plans going forward, saying that you have staff that's currently already on place, that's gone through the security wickets, the background checks, et cetera. So, we're beholden to the regulations of the federal government.
And so let me see if I can add to that one as well. And I don't know if anybody from Amazon's security and compliance team is in the audience, but we actually have worked with customers who have been had a need to meet CJIS security requirements. And there is a workbook that's available to help you work through that on Amazon. You go to aws.amazon.com/security. And if you can't find it, get in touch with anybody at Amazon or any of our partners who are experienced with the AWS security and compliance models, and they can help you with that. A lot of times you'll find that you might have compensating controls. And so, again, this is a little bit of a sort of a it depends scenario, but we do have folks that have been able to achieve that compliance requirement, perhaps by just working closely with their security folks using our security workbooks, and then identifying compensating controls. So we only have a minute and a half left, and I want to ask one last question to every panelist. If there's one thing that you could tell the audience here to do, or one thing that you've learned that you would tell them absolutely watch out for, what would it be? Mike?
It's a set of dominoes. So once you start, be prepared to continue to change. And so, like I said, we first learned that we were deficient in ops, and so we got a managed service partner to support us. Then we learned we're deficient in architecture, and so we had to train some more architects and had some very interesting meetings with MJ and some of his folks about we need to stop thinking about servers and start thinking about services. And I think we're making some traction there, and now we're looking at going, well great, who's going to develop apps on these new environments? And so it is contagious in the sense that once you start this, you really need to embrace all of it, because once you get into it, you realize you're only touching the surface, and you want to go that next step to continue to, almost if you would, set your eyes on like a DevOps model and to continue to approach that through a more linear process. And then on the don'ts is, if you're not ready for it, don't pull the trigger, or don't do it without advice, because there's a bunch of people that have already done a bunch of this stuff. And I know in government we're really bad about sharing information about what's going on at other agencies, but find the networks where they are talking about it, and you can go to these meetups and breakfasts and the local things that go on in your communities, because you'll find out people are already doing this stuff and they've addressed some kind of weird compliance issue or some kind of infrastructure issue, or there's a service provider that's already done it and knows how to do it. So
Great. Nikki?
And just to dovetail on what Mike said and what I spoke to a little bit earlier, consensus building. If you really want to be successful at implementing and adopting the big tent strategy, getting all the stakeholders around the table very early. Also, definitely reaching out and engaging industry, your systems integrators and your cloud service providers, who can walk you through a lot of the lessons learned, help you understand some best practices with respect to implementation. I mean, when these things go off, you want them to go off as smoothly as possible in that transition, such that it builds trust within the organization and people are not, as afraid of cloud, and what that all means. So definitely starting very early, like you said, getting your ducats in a row from an IT resources perspective, budgeting, have that on board. And one final thing that we didn't talk on a lot, also your acquisition model and your procurement model, particularly on the government side, because we are beholden to FAR. And FAR is not exactly the friend of speed and agility, which is what cloud is supposed to foster. So sitting down with your contracts and your procurements folks and determining how it is that you're going to work within the confines of FAR to be able to adopt these technologies quickly.
Great. MJ?
I'll keep mine short. Embrace everything Amazon has to offer. It truly is cutting edge. And we went all in on Amazon. We truly believe in it, and we stand behind it with all our customers.
That's awesome. So there it was. Go all in, get a big tent, and pick a smart team. I think that's what I heard. Thank you very much for your questions.